My second guest tonight on Rachoń is our regular guest, Joe Lindsay. On several occasions has provided us with invaluable insights into what the situation looks like in Ukraine since February 2022. Through his Ukrainian Freedom News, he's been bringing the truth about Russian aggression and trying to get support to the brave defenders of Ukraine. Welcome back to TVP World. Joe, you are in Lviv. You've been there when those massive shellings and those massive attacks of Russian missiles hit the city, and as we know, hit also Poland as a result, as an outcome of this attack. What's your take and what's your assessment of the situation?
Well, and as I speak to you here, Michał, good to see you. Speaking to you from Lviv, it's the first snow of the winter, so we're reminded it's going to be it's very beautiful to see it, but it's going to be a very difficult, long and cold winter here. Today we had additional strikes, nothing as big as what we saw on Tuesday. Tuesday, those infrastructure attacks was certainly the most coordinated Russian attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure since the beginning of the war. And even now, today, we have rolling blackouts here in Lviv.
Well, the thing is that if countries of West, countries of NATO allow Russia to wage this kind of war, more victims may show up also on the territory of NATO member states, countries that are not involved, because this war can cross the borders, as we just saw. What is the way and what is the assessment of this incident from the perspective of people who you meet on a daily basis, regular citizens in Ukraine?
Well, I mean, here, it's a physical manifestation of the danger that Ukrainians and Poles and I think Baltic people, but especially here in Ukraine, people know what kind of danger Russia is. And, just last week, I was very close to Russia, just a couple miles from Russia. With artillery fire coming our way, when you're right there at the edge of the free world, you can see very clearly what kind of evil this is. When you go to cities like Bakhmut or Mykolaiv, you can see it. But what happened?
Joe, speaking of Bakhmut,
yeah.
we are just showing, and we are going to show it in a second, the footage that was recorded in Bakhmut in late October. I mean, the ruins of the hospital, the ruins of the administrational buildings, the new footage that was released today after those attacks. I mean, this is the way that the Ruski Mir looks like in practice. What is your assessment? You've been there, you saw this.
When situations happen like the debris and the missile falling in Poland, the world maybe will begin to see this is how dangerous the Kremlin is, this is how dangerous Russia is. I was in Bakhmut in June, and it was pretty scary to be there in June. There was a lot of damage, and there was a lot of artillery fire, but it's nothing like what it is now. And in fact, last night, I met with a friend who's a Ukrainian fighter. I hadn't seen him since April, and he was fighting outside of Bakhmut. He was telling me the story of one of his best friends, who was actually an Israeli-Ukrainian, a Jewish-Ukrainian fighter who was killed not far from there. And it is absolutely horrible what's happening there. You have the Russian mercenary group, the Wagner group, with no scruples whatsoever. And it's a city of about 70,000 people. Just as the Ukrainians have liberated Kherson, the Russians, they can't control any major cities. And so if they can't control something, we see that they simply try to destroy it. And the Bakhmut that I saw in June is unrecognizable now, as you can see in this footage, as they're trying to erase the city from the map. I was just also speaking with people from Kharkiv, which before the war was Ukraine's second biggest city. And that city had such a great entrepreneurial spirit when I visited before the war. It was a Russian-speaking city, and I think perhaps definitely Putin is jealous of these Russian-speaking Ukrainian cities because they were nice places to live. And now he's trying to make sure that the world only sees them as scenes of destruction, rather than the beautiful, happy, sort of family-friendly places that they were before February 24th.
Joe, what is that we can do, being in a relatively safe places, to help out people who are fighting the war over there?
I think the first thing is to pay attention to the information front, and that's very important so we all understand what's happening. And for example, when the missile landed in the farm in Poland a couple of days ago, you had different responses. Even the Secretary General of the United Nations, Gutierrez, his first instinct was to say we need to avoid escalating the war in Ukraine. Now, what does that mean? All of a sudden there's a sneaky shift in rhetoric, which is exactly what the Kremlin wants, to start blaming Ukraine for the problems of the war, whether it's inflation and rising prices in America or missiles falling in Poland. And here's where we have to catch ourselves and say, every time we hear people talk about escalation, we have to think, what does that mean? And sometimes you have to escalate in order to get victory. And the main, what is the goal here? It's to stop the menace in the Kremlin, which is the threat to free people anywhere in the world. Whenever you hear someone use escalation in a negative sense, I think we need to see, escalation is positive if it's Ukrainian and Western victories, but that's only possible if we can keep supplying Ukrainians with the weapons they need to fight the fight so the rest of us don't have to fight it.
Yeah, famous words of Ronald Reagan about the peace that can be reached in a very easy manner by surrender. So never surrender, as famously Winston Churchill said a long time ago. Joe, good to see you. Stay safe.
Welcome to Ukraine. Doch nur